Okay, here in another blatant attempt at white guilt, here we are going to show you how much better people used to be at doing things than you are now. An incredible game of my dad can beat up your dad. 10 things the ancients did better than us, featuring a plethora of technologies versus what you see today. So let's just get into this, and I'm going to go off on a winger. Just a couple of decades ago, the people of ancient civilizations were viewed as simple, primitive people. However, numerous discoveries since then have revealed a number of surprising facts about ancient cultures, namely that many of them possessed ancient knowledge of metallurgy, mathematics, chemistry, astronomy, and more. For indeed, I've shown you a lot of these things, and how literally right in front of you there we seem to have broken about 1200 years onto the Iron Age, and then a meteorite iron dagger that's King Tut's, which would blow you away for metallurgy. But mathematics, we could go with the ancient Sumerians had advanced trigonometry with an easier formula pattern than we use today, but it would be what the computer formula for trigonometry would be in hexadecimal. Isn't that special? In chemistry, we find that people made Egyptian blue and certain things like that, and worked with complex things, but also found derivatives of stuff like out of urine using this and that. And how the hell did they ever figure it out? And apparently a lot of trial and error, so they were doing it. In chemistry kind of comes from Kemet, the ancient name for Egypt, and where things like this went on, where that was considered alchemy, right? And then alchemy is a strange thing, for it's showing you the ancient Levantine people of the Levant and their take on chemistry, their version of that, hence the al, and where that linguistics all works from in that area. In astronomy, we've shown things that date back as far as reaching into 30,000 BCs with Lagoon Cave and places like this that actually have symbolic representations of Taurus and Orion and places, but also how things are lined up amazingly using multiple fields of these same things, astronomy and mathematics. And then we're laying out stones that we've used metallurgy to make, and we use a type of chemistry to kind of do that thing and have it all figured out and more. So let's just take a look at those amazing Caucasians. With this knowledge, they forged steel stronger than anything else seen until the Industrial Revolution. Created a recipe for concrete so durable that their buildings would endure for millennia longer than the constructions of today. Cut stones and assembled walls so precisely that attempts at modern day replications have failed. Scientists are still scratching their heads over some of the amazing accomplishments of ancient civilizations, and here we go, featuring 10 of them. So let's just start to look through this list. Is this even lined up right? Not quite. Let's try to get that. Number 1, aqueducts. Aqueducts is basically water tubes, as it comes out of in linguistics. And what they have done here in a lot of places is simply cut a trench in places like the guttering on your house to funnel water around and down to a certain area. And I don't know if you've ever checked it out in your house, but it always runs down to that little downspout. The downspout is the lowest point of that thing, but whenever they attach it to your house and get it done right, it's really, you have a 25-foot stretch there with it on there, and it's really 1 inch lower, but you can't even almost see it, not at all. If you have to be forced to look at it, you might. About 1 inch lower during the whole thing, and so it causes all the water to run down that way. And this is a modern aqueduct, or a way of using them. Now, people did this on the ground a long time ago, and just making trenches for irrigation. But when you're trying to span water from over there to over here and have to go through terrain that goes up and down, you build an elevated aqueduct to the point of the water, but just a hair low, and it comes down and down this trench that's going here and continues to go on. And some of the wonders of the world are the Roman and Greek aqueducts, which we believe a lot should be contributed also to the Etruscans on that endeavor. Who would have thought that 21st century governments would be looking to 1,500-year-old technology for guidance on how to solve water access problems? But that's exactly what is happening in Lima, Peru. Peru has been facing severe water crisis as chronic problems such as polluted water supplies and environmental change combined to the undermine the water security of the entire country. However, a new plan has been put forward by Lima's water utility company, Sedapal, to revive an ancient network of stone canals that were built by the Wari culture. We were looking at those, and the Wari culture were these blue-eyed guys that had these blonde and red hair, and they still have the mummies of them and stuff, and the cloud people. Built as the Wari culture as early as 500 AD. They go back earlier than that. That's the wrong number. In order to supply the population with clean, unpolluted water. Perhaps the site they were looking at, they tried to date it 500 AD. The Wari culture go back much earlier than that. They've even self-admittedly gone back to at least 1600 BC. Or they're not going to have that, are they? Anyhow, this Wari culture is that one that I've shown you where they have the little blue discs over their eyes whenever they pull the mummies out of the ground and stuff, and their little pits that they're in. And naturally mummified mummies. In fact, they're some of the oldest mummies in the world can be found within their group. So it could go. And whenever you look at statistics like the oldest mummy in the world in that culture of people, it goes back actually older than Egypt. But then there are naturally formed type of mummies, and we're not going to go there because that's not necessarily a. You could say that modern embalming, coming through a series of events, is something much better and more of an understanding, and people don't pop their brains out anymore and stuff. But whatever. So these aqueducts, though, they found them in places like Jordan at Petra, and that will take any rainwater they had and funnel it down and run it down to collection areas. And you go, man, it doesn't rain in Jordan. About the time they built those, it must have, huh? Right. So when are they going to date them to? And you have to start working off of that sometimes. But these aqueducts, this one here, if you'll look, it's all made of stone. And so these stones, even though they look a little rough here, are stuck together so tight that water rushing down, which is what we're looking at, isn't just falling all out the gaps, but it's just going on and on and on like a terracotta pipe. It's quite interesting. The Wari built an advanced water conservation system that captured mountain water during the rainy season via canals. The canals transported the water to places where it could be fed into springs further down the mountain in order to maintain the flow of rivers during the dry season. Boy, that sounds pretty advanced, and somebody'd have to be there some time and figure all this out and work with it, and then to get it to work all out for you too on top of it. Of course, we're talking about pseudo rainforest area, but it's right there on Peru too, so it's on the edge of this whole weird confluence of areas that lead into Nazca and shit. But many ancient civilizations are known for their advanced construction of cisterns, canals, aqueducts, and water channeling technology, including the Persians, Nabateans, Romans, Greeks, Harappan culture, and more. And that's all concluding Caucasians working on it and doing it. So there's aqueducts that are run over there that the Romans built that go all the way through this mountain thing just to bring water for this place. And they do these tours and you walk through it. I tried to show it in one of the videos and it got pegged, so I cut it out and it went away. And I'm like, man, I can't even show like 20 seconds worth of video. So I've taken to showing just pictures and things like that right now, and I'll try every once in a while to sneak it in. I know some places don't do this type of thing, but others do. See this strange folded type of iron they have? Well, it's layers of carbon going over and over again, and there's the ancient known of Damascus steel, but there's Cuthbert steel, and then there's stories of steel way before that. And then, like I said, King Tut's dagger, which I've got 2 videos on. It's pretty interesting. It's made out of meteorific iron. It has this same type of deal onto it, and so it's been forged and everything. And of course, if it's in with King Tut, that's much earlier too. His headrest has made out of iron and things too. And they say, well, that must have came from the Mitanni and the Amarna thing, or the Mitanni that came before that. And I did a video about Thuya and Yuya and their blonde-hairedness and all the way they run through right there. And now people now are trying to say that must be remnants of Hyksos or Armarnia or something, and trying to grasp at straws and ask you what you think. But at the same time, it looks like, you know, there are certain people that heralded metal and chariots and all these things coming in with the Hyksos too. And so the Egyptians didn't have it all going on. They just had a good portion. Whenever you put it all together, you kind of get the Greeks, who seem to have been taking kind of the best of everybody's little stuff and putting it together, but did something totally different. Their statuary came in living poses and stuff and looked real, and to this day it just looks like if they were to somehow come out and say that Medusa actually, those are all warriors and everything, and all they did was look at Medusa and turn to stone, and you know, that's almost believable, as realistic and stuff as they look, although they're, you know, not an inch of fat on anybody. Everybody's just like Adonis. And yeah, right. Anyhow, like Asclepius said, they're just the heads. This stuff right down here is putting a godly image on somebody. And what are you saying? The dude was fat, but this is a good head, and they made it so the head sticks on there. Their arms pose in different ways. It's like a fucking Ken doll, which is another neat technology to the whole thing. They almost made them like posing, like you could use them in certain situations to do things, and they would paint them. A lot of people don't know they're painted in older times, and they had all kinds of colors all over them, and they can find them microscopically now. Number 2, steel. Over 2,000 years ago, ancient people in the Levant were forging swords made of steel, so advanced that blacksmiths would not come close to creating anything of quality until modern times. Damascus. The metal was so strong the swords could slice straight through objects made of other metals. And this was noted, like, so there's ancient stories of a few things, and everybody goes, oh yeah, that's like some Hercules story and everything else. No, straight up shit straight. The dude had a sword that was so sharp that he sliced the other guy's sword. They hit each other like ching, and it cut the other dude's sword off of him. It cut it off. It cut now the dude has like dun 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 dun. It's yeah, things like this had happened because, you know, put some force behind it and you can get it to go the other way, and depending on how good their bronze is, and there's technological feats that go on with simple things like that people nowadays just go, huh, you know, yeah, we got titanium, chromium, bauxite, blah blah blah, and it's like, really? Okay, so some amazing stuff though. Damascus steel. Tell you something about steel in a minute too, and the riddle of steel. But steel, known as Damascus steel, was produced out of raw material known as Wootz steel from Asia. Other materials were added during the steel's production to create chemical reactions at the quantum level. It was first used around 300 BC, but produced in mass in the Middle East between 1100 and 1700 AD, and pretty much lost the technology at the end of that. And people have still gathered it. They've realized the techniques and everything like that. But eventually they say the steel is from Asia. Of course, Anatolia is Asia Minor, but all these Proto-Indo-Europeans in Asia, and Asia goes all the way through to China, all the way reaching over the top of India, and all the way back through. all the way to the Mediterranean. Yep. So other materials were added during that production, and it was like high carbon content, and it can get like 4.5, 5 times the amount. And so also temperatures had to be kept at a certain amount. And what's odd about this is that another thing, it looked like popcorn out of nowhere. It was just found out, but now it just shows up in this area. And where's the rest of it? Well, they tried to start off with saying over 2,000 years ago, so just before Christ. No, no, no. We're talking, we've got that beat by King Tut's date. You know, you've got 1,500 years, the Marna letters and stuff, and you go back, you're going back 1,700 BC, more than that, where you've got steel there. And they go, well, no, that was, you got it messed up. But that's where the Copper Age kind of came into the Bronze Age, and they weren't using arsenic anymore but tin, and it got going. No, 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 there's steel going on. Some people had steel at that time. Some people already had domestic horses going on then. Some people already had domesticated animals and grains and all kinds of things from a long, long time before. Just a lot going on over there. A lot. It's amazing. The secret of making the Middle East Damascus steel only re-emerged under inspection of scanning electron microscopes in modern laboratories. So that's the only way they're able to really pull it off. They knew they folded it and they did certain things, but that's pretty much it. And oddly enough, that technique is similar, real similar technique is being used in the ancients to make the katana swords. It had the same thing, but it was this thin blade and made just to the right arc, that when it cut through things, it didn't just hack into it like a hatchet, but it was slicing the whole time. And they could cut through basically, a man's leg in a heartbeat. No, no, no. They could take something like a tree the size of your leg and hit it just right and make it through that thing. They could take in other people's swords and make it to where it didn't do anything. They could hack at arms and it would take them off at limb sections. It's a hacking maneuver. Number 3, concrete. And we look at some here, and what's weird about this is this has been concreted up somewhat. You can see that originally all had arches all over, and then somebody just concreted it up and made a much smaller arch, and then somebody even concreted that up and made the windowlets that you have in here. You can see that around each one. Here you can even see the arch built into it, and the big arch, big eyebrows. And it's a small one and a large one, and a small one and a large one, and it's exactly right all the way around it. Figured out by mathematics on arch, and this is sacred geometry stuff right here. Yep. And all these piers here are giant trees that were cut down and suspended off into other pillars that are in there, and that's your second floor, and then your ceiling roof. But there's a third floor, your attic up there. Today's concrete structures are typically designed to last between 100 and 120 years. However, Romans built structures from concrete over 2,000 years ago that have maintained their structural integrity to this day. So what was their secret? There's plaster that's been out in the open in Egypt, albeit it hasn't been facing as much weird temperature variations as much, but I don't know, it gets cold in the night and everything, and their plaster is very much like a type of concrete. What was special about concrete was its strength, and its secret was it was basically beach sand and a certain grade of beach sand. It was ash from Crete, from the volcano that was there, and that gave them certain chemicals. And mixing lye and those three together, or whatever it is, and you had to do it just right and made sure it's mixed and thoroughly. And you mix this with that and that with this, and you wet it to an exact amount, churning it around and getting it to be a slurry, and then you have to make some block out of it that really becomes a structural thing. And we don't do it quite that way anymore, and they mix it up and then people flatten it out and everything, and there's your driveway, and 10-15 years later you have cracks all in your driveway. They don't have cracks in this shit, and it's holding up buildings that are huge. Huge, 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 huge. The only thing close to it, and we found this out in America, Portland cement's made basically from coral skeletons from coral reef dredged up, and they pulverize that into dust and use it in the same place, and it comes out pretty damn good. Portland cement is a lot better, and if you've done any work with concrete or anything, you'll find that to be a industry standard type thing nowadays. But yet this mixture was much better at some time. The Romans made concrete by mixing lime, volcanic rock, and seawater. The combination of three instantly triggered a chemical reaction in which the lime incorporated molecules into its structure and reacted with the ash to cement the whole mixture together. The ancient seawater concrete contains the ideal crystalline structure of tobermorite, which has a greater strength and durability than its modern equivalent, and it basically turns into something that's along the lines of pseudo-granite. And they even were able to develop underwater curing versions of it, because it reacts off of it anyhow, but all they had to do is adjust it in a way and make it to where you could pour it in water and do that. Nowadays we use that all the time, and people don't realize that, and how that's just incredible. As well as being more durable, Roman concrete was also more environmentally friendly compared to today's concrete. Conventional modern cement requires heating and a mix of limestone and clay to 1450 degrees Celsius, which releases significant amounts of carbon into the atmosphere. Oh no! In contrast, Roman cement used much less lime and made it from the baking of limestone at around 900 degrees, requiring less fuel. And they were a bunch more wasteful, and they were burning down forests to end up making it happen during that ancient times too. And there's no way around it. We might be using natural gas to do it in this other one, and now we've got filtration on it. Before, they were just putting it up in the atmosphere as soot. Everything's okay. They need to stop this just ecology bullshit that's going on. You know, it's not going to be that. It wasn't that before that caused it. Number 4, road building. And there's all kinds of roads that have been found. I've just found a recent story about the oldest road in America, and it apparently comes before even the Americans were here. It was a trail that led up the northeast right on the coast, and ended up being made into a road much like this, and flattened stones, and then people did more to it and paved it. They had shitty bridges that they turned into better bridges, and there's still one standing that's one of these incredibly built bridges way back in the 1600s, and goes all the way through hundreds of miles actually, and somewhat piecemeal. I remember when I was a kid, there was the old road to Dallas that we found out, you know, way out of town someplace, and it led out, and all of a sudden there's just stuff growing in it and everything. People don't drive down it anymore. Piece of tree sticking out. Eventually you had to stop and turn around. In a place of it, something had fallen over, and it was just not used anymore. And it was really like 2 strips for your tires to go on, and that's it. And you might be able to get over right and get over left and have a car pass each other back in the day, and you'd be riding in the pseudo rut of both sides, you know, that type of thing. And you can imagine old jalopies trying to do that type of thing. But supposedly that was the cattle trail that they went and would take all the way up through and go to Fort Worth. And back in the old days, it was from that point where it would be, and then they turned it into the road and so on. But then that was the old Dallas Highway. And then there's an actual paved thing that's called the old Dallas Highway, that even is called the old Dallas Highway, and it's not a piece of it that's called that. That's because it's been incorporated into modern things, where it used to come from a different angle, kind of running through there. And but anyhow, these days we'd be lucky to get a decent highway built within a year, but today we're building it in all kinds of weird ways and stuff that are different than what's before, and using asphalt, which is basically like the bitumen and tar of things like on Noah's boat, mixed up with gravel that would be like in concrete, with some sand and some other crap, and you float it down onto the road, and then the tar seals everything together just like it would a boat, with all these rocks in it to give it more stability. And that's it. It's pretty much like putting all these rocks in there and then just pouring a layer of bitumen and gravel all over it. But they put down all kinds of things nowadays and try to make a level surface and make it so they don't have to fix it in 10 years. But it was not always this way. Ancient people recognized the importance of roads and networks linking together cities and settlements across regions and countries, and they built them fast. Chapnan, otherwise known as Main Andean Road, is a huge network of roads since used by the mighty Inca Empire that extends over 30,000 kilometers in all of its trajectories. It was the backbone of the Inca Empire's political and economic power, connecting production, administrative, and ceremonial centers of pre-Inca and Andean culture. The Incas of Cusco achieved this unique infrastructure on a grand scale in less than a century, they say, extending the vast network to what is now Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, and Ecuador. And there's some people that say that that shows you that they didn't build any of that, that they showed up later. And they're the end of the culture that really had come before it, pretty much. And that's what they're looking at, as opposed to that. And you have that running all the way through the Olmecs, but let's continue. The Romans are known as expert road builders. About 1.7 million square miles of territory was covered by the Roman roads, which were made of gravel, dirt, and bricks made from granite or hard lava. Many ancient roads are still used today, and there used to be a statement that they say all roads lead to Rome. And that's not necessarily true, but a hell of a lot of them were. Number 5. Of stone cutting. These are the H blocks that are there at Pumapunku, and they look like they have been actually grafted out, and in their chiseling, supposedly with a upper grade copper brass which this is supposedly harder than by 1 grade, if I'm understanding them, that they chipped it out, being able to look this fancy and this intricate. You could say the same thing about the Egyptians, but at first they thought these things were exacting copies, and so it must be a mold even, or something that they were going off of, or exacting. You know, it would be hard to pull off exactness even with a plan. Then they found out, no, they're all slightly different and unique made, but exactly the same, but they're just a hair of differences between each one. And these false doors that are all built into them, and people ignore the giant platform of huge stones that's all built around and stuff that these were on, and people ignore the fact that they're all just thrown as if they were made out of a kid's blocks. And he got a little frustrated and went meh, and he knocked them all down and got up and walked off and got his bottle and went to sleep, and nobody knew what the cool little thing was built out of the blocks beforehand. People have put them together to make this weird little thing that looks so Art Deco modern and stuff, and all you got to do is just stick them together. Not like they show here, but one goes on top of another, and they run around. They've got the other size in between, and so they lock together, kind of. They say, well, that makes sense, because these pieces go to these pieces. It would do like that. But how are they going to move these things around? These are tons. And it's not a block, a kid's block, and you're just going to do it. But around the world, we can find numerous examples of ancient stone cutting so precise that they rival creations of the modern day produced with advanced machinery. One prime example can be found in Pumapunku, an ancient archaeological excavation site in Bolivia, dated to historians by some 15,000 years old. And this is being somewhat accepted nowadays by some people, and other people are definitely like, that was 1500 BC, and it's like, that doesn't go with the culture that you're talking about either. That contains such incredible stonework that it is, if the stones were cut using a diamond tool or laser evacuation types that we use now in CNC machines. Enormous block weighing up to 800 tons consist of perfectly straight edges that lock perfectly into each other and contain no chisel marks. Attempts to replicate the precision of stonework have failed. And amazing thing about that, they say it could be as old as 15,000 years ago. And you look at how sharp the edges are in a lot of these things, and they have these micro drill holes in them and patterns and stuff too, and all kinds of neat stuff. But if we just said it was 1500 years old, you look at the amount of weathering, 1500 BC, or let's just say 1500 years old, 500 BC, look at the amount of weathering that's on here, up the Andes Mountains and stuff, and how sharp the edges are. There are places where guys have actually run their finger along it and gotten it to slice like a paper cut into their finger from grooves that are on it. Just, that's how thin they are. Cut to so much of a point and still set to that. Do you think if we took something and laser cut it to this day that looked just like this, and then we set it up on a mountaintop for 1500 years or 15,000 years, that it would still look this good? Number 6, agriculture. And here is ancient farming of a lot of people, and this is a symbology of an area in the Inca area where it seems that they had made canals running through, almost like a Venice situation of gardens, and because they're slightly submerged all around it, they're getting groundwater. Like whenever you have a dish below your house plant and you pour water in it, save some in the dish. Now you can just pour some in the dish, it'll suck it up into it. It's not near as good as rain, but they still have that, and it keeps the soil in a certain way. They have found recently that the soil that they were using in some of these areas seems to have been man-made out of composting and things. That the soil right over there, the reason everything looks shitty over there is nothing grows in it. And the reason everything is overgrown, this whole area, so much is that they've got all this composty thing that's going on around it, and it made the jungle just swallow that shit up. It's amazing. I've got another video coming, but I'm waiting on one more thing from this group that's supposed to have put it out, but then again, this might be holding it off, and I know this is going to hold off a lot of archaeology that was up and coming here, and that kind of sucks, guys, but hopefully we get some good new material to come in from the people that were putting it out as soon as possible. But we're supposed to be getting some new information on a site that they had done all that LiDAR on before, and then now the guys made that little paper and doing things. Well, once they found the original, they went out and did some more and things and used the same deal and the plane with the thing, and now they're compiling through all that too, but then also doing a finalizing on the first, and then all this new information. And somebody is supposedly going out there and they're doing an initial site evaluation, if you would, and next thing is an archaeological team, and here we go. Probably starting at some of the bigger buildings, working their way out over a process of years. So, agriculture. Human sacrifice is typically the first thing that comes to people's mind when they think about the Aztecs and other Mesoamerican cultures. Well, yeah, I mean, they were famous for killing all kinds of people for all kinds of things, and thought that that was going to fix something, and it seems to have gone on over here on the other side of the world too, by the way, and maybe it just got out of hand, and maybe it just got really out of hand here. But however, there's much more to these civilizations than this practice, and of course there are incredible things about them. One of their innovations was the Chinampa agricultural system, the so-called floating gardens, which can be found in the shallow lake beds in the Valley, Mexico. The Chinampa plot was constructed by staking out a rectangular enclosure into the marshy lake bed. The enclosure would then be fenced in by joining stakes with wattle, so it's basically mud and daub. I mean, you can make a wattle and daub house. It's basically mud, and after that, the fence-in area would be filled with mud and decaying vegetation in order to prevent the roots from becoming waterlogged. It was important that the fill brought the Chinampa plot above the lake level. Canals surrounding the Chinapa plots formed an illusion that these agricultural lands were little floating islands on water, hence its misattribution to floating gardens. To further stabilize these plots of land, willows were planted around the perimeters. This is due to the dense rooting system of willows, which over time anchored the retaining walls of the structures and reduced the effects of erosion in order to ensure that the Chinapas produced good harvest throughout the year. It was vital that the supply of water was well managed. During the rainy season, flooding would have been a problem, hence the sophisticated drainage system, which included dams, sluice gates, and canals, which were put in place to counter this problem by using human excrement to fertilize the crops. The Aztecs were able to create a healthier living environment as the city's wastewater would have also been treated. So, natural treating of wastewater is just like in a fish tank. Bacteria form to eat it, and it becomes ammonia, which is toxic as hell. But a bacteria forms to eat that, forms nitrite, which is like fertilizer. But a bacteria forms to eat that, and it forms nitrate, which is another form of fertilizer. So ammonium nitrate is fertilizer, and along with potash, and you can feed that system with all kinds of things, like even human excrement. And what's believed in this area happened, and also there's evidence of similar like this, but with cow excrement, it seems, in Sumeria, that they would have these overflows that would flow into certain plots of land, and it would flood the whole little area out and then quit. Well, when the river got up, it would reach up and pour into there. Now also, right as it got up there, they could knock stuff that they had in there loose, and it was basically going to wash that into the system and churn that and flow into a basin that spills out. And so they're all getting some of that fertilizer a little bit. And there are evidence, they say, hey, there's where they put cow dung in here and did this and did that, and they had sluice type things or ways to lock it off too. They'd have extra mud bricks and things there, and they would close off the little canal and then quit running through there after they got the thing flooded, and that's all you needed. And of course you could go back over there and undo it if the water's still up and get it to flood again a little bit and back in, and do that a couple of times and help you water your crops and stuff by managing agriculture like that. And it's pretty interesting how they could come up with something that was like that, and these ground sluices, which are really like an aqueduct but cut into the ground, and sometimes using rock and things like that to do it too. So the system of agriculture and wastewater treatment seen in the floating gardens, though, in Mexico was so advanced that there have been attempts unsuccessfully to implement in the modern times. So they apparently had it working on for hundreds of years, and people tried to recreate it and didn't quite work right. May have not flushed the system often enough, by the water running in and things like that. I mean, San Antonio's got water running through it with the river walk, and if you just slowed that down a little too much, it might turn around and get a little stagnant. But they make sure doesn't, and it goes through the town and spills back in and ends up making the town really not so hot, but sizzling. And if you've ever been to San Antonio, it's a special little place. Not only the Alamo that you can see right from down there, and the Riverwalk's right there at it, but going down the Riverwalk and the shops that are there and things like that. So it's a nice place to visit. Megalithic walls, and some of them with nipples. We've talked about this exact stone before here, guys. This stone right here, I mean, it's just foolish to make this stone. But what's even more foolish is on top of it, they made stones that fit into that to keep going. So did they already have these stones, and they made this so it would fit it? Because that's the only logical, really, thing that you can get out of it, is they already had these stones, and instead of putting them in any other order, because they're all slightly different size, they decided to throw them in like this. And so what would make that fit this, with what they're looking, is they put in this stone, which does go to this height perfectly, and does go to this height perfectly, and could be cut off right there. And now we can figure it out from here and just set these things down like Tetris and keep working. But no, hell no, hell no, 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 no. I'm going to make one that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 cuts on this thing. So it'll fit to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 rocks and a foundation. And all fit in like that. People have asked, why? Because they could. But that also says, hold on a second, that started off with these were already rocks that were already made from something else. Well, it could have been some type of reuse. But then they do the same damn thing to this rock right here, and the way it cuts in, and it looks like, well, they were squares, and they cut in to do it like this. Whenever they can cut a perfect square, look, a perfect square. This is a cube. This is a cube, and if you look, they're beveled, just like this in Peru. But they're beveled just like the ones that you find over in Canaanite lands, all the way up through Anatolia and stuff, where they're beveled in like a V, and then the surface is just kind of matte, and there's some nipples on them, but not always. If they were always there, well, you say, well, somebody knocked them off. Well, why didn't they knock that one off? Why did they leave them on? Even if they did serve a purpose, why'd they leave them on? Maybe because they found in reuse that you should just leave the nipples on. Okay, but you can't wrap around. What the hell is the nipple for? A prying method of some way, a lifting, ropes go around it. They don't lock on it. It's too smoothed off. Oh, well, back then it wasn't. Well, then it won't work in the future, so you should have knocked them off anyhow. It doesn't make any sense. And while they tried to use this so to do all that, here below it is just little bitty rocks that have all made perfectly to fit all of that. And it ain't square anymore either, and it goes up, hopping up for this guy. Is it just so he can fit to these? Well, yeah, it's just so he can fit to these. But you had to cut that cut. And it fits there and it fits there, but then they do this crap instead of Tetrising it down. And you could have just cut this off here and used this rock someplace else that probably went up here to square and square, and there's another square. And you can use squares in some way, shape, or form instead of using this style, which looks more like plant cell structure, but then there's ones like this that are like, what? People just walk by it every day. The Inca civilization is well known for its advanced masonry work, months of which can still be seen today in Machu Picchu and Sacsayhuaman in Peru. There are large dry stone walls to play huge blocks that have been carefully cut to fit together tightly without mortar and with levels of precision unmatched anywhere else in the Americas. The stones are so closely spaced that a single piece of paper often will not fit between many of the stones, because there are ones that will. This precision, combined with the rounded corners of the blocks, the variety of their interlocking shapes, and the way that the walls lean inward together to help prevent damage in the event of an earthquake, perhaps, have puzzled scientists for decades. The method used to match precisely the shape of a stone with the adjacent stones is still unknown, and attempts to recreate the technique have failed, and people have done it much softer stone in a much smaller scale, and then giving them the other one, they're like, wow, that's going to be tough, and then they say, hold on, let me take your machine here away and give you this little mallet and this rounded rock and this kind of brass looking chisel-y thing. Have at it. Well, that's all they had, so they did what they did and everything. Now, that sounds like your grandma, and you only had one shoe on the way up to school, but these people had more than one shoe. City planning. Here we can see a neat little city plan going off, and it looks like a major water feature in the front of it and stuff. In the last century, numerous ancient cities have been unearthed that have astounded scientists and urban planners alike. Whereas it looked like some cities had grown from a group of houses that weren't on a grid to a pseudo this way to a pseudo grid going this way to stuff, and you look at, like, ancient Rome and some places where you can have stuff going to the lay of the land and all that. Now it changes and blends in with each other. The roads go hooking around, but some of these ancient structures are all lined up